Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, we are going to just jump right into this today because we're unpacking one of the wildest, most rapid escalations in modern history. We are looking at the rise and fall of the world's most infamous criminal empire, spearheaded by a man whose name is recognized literally across the globe, Pablo Escobar. This is a story of extreme duality, of just unbelievable, mind-boggling wealth, and tragically, a devastating human cost. So stick with me as we trace the exact path of a street-level hustler who completely transformed himself into the undisputed king of cocaine. To truly understand the sheer scale of what we're dealing with today, I want to start by throwing this oddly specific number out there, $2,500. Take a second and think about what a small business might spend $2,500 on every single month. You know, maybe rent for a tiny storefront, some new office equipment. Well, for Escobar's operation, that was their monthly budget just for the rubber bands needed to hold their stacks of cash together. Let that sink in for a second. $2,500 a month, literally just on rubber bands. It instantly establishes the staggering, almost incomprehensible scale of wealth we're going to be talking about. But, of course, he didn't just start out with a mountain of cash. Section 1. Roots of a Hustler, the Muddy Beginnings of 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the criminal, you've got to understand his foundation. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria definitely was not born into wealth. He was born in 1949, the son of a humble school teacher and a peasant farmer. But crucially, he was raised during La Violencia, which was a horrific period of intense political turmoil and violence in Colombia, and that environment profoundly shaped his trajectory. Look at the 1960s. His early hustle allegedly began with stealing gravestones, literally sanding the names off of them and reselling them. From there, the escalation is just rapid. He goes to counterfeiting high school diplomas, stealing cars, and even orchestrating kidnappings. But by the mid-1970s, Escobar had this realization. Smuggling standard contraband yielded tiny margins compared to this new white powder that was starting to sweep across the Americas. Section 2. The Medellin Cocaine Empire, Industrializing the Trade. So that industrialization really kicked off in 1976 when Escobar founded what would eventually become known as the Medellin Cartel. And by the height of its power in the 1980s, they weren't just a big player, they were an absolute global monopoly. They controlled an estimated 80% of the entire global cocaine market. Think about that. 8 out of every 10 lines of cocaine consumed anywhere in the world traced directly back to Escobar's organization. And that massive market dominance resulted in this absolutely staggering figure, $420 million. But wait, here is the crucial point. That wasn't their yearly revenue. That was their estimated revenue every single week. This unprecedented wealth created a vivid, almost unbelievable picture of sheer excess. I mean, to hit that 420 million a week mark, they were smuggling roughly 15 tons of cocaine into the United States daily. 15 tons. They had so much physical cash lying around in damp warehouses that rats were actually eating an estimated 10% of it every year, and the cartel just wrote it off as a standard business loss. Escobar himself bought a vast estate called Hacienda Nápoles, and it didn't just have, luxury cars, it featured its own airport, a kart racing track, and, notoriously, a private zoo housing what we now call the cocaine hippos. It was literally wealth without limits. Section 3. Silver or lead, the duality of 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻. Now, you might be wondering, how do you protect a criminal empire of that massive size? Well, it all comes down to 3 simple words that completely distilled Escobar's approach to authority: plata o plomo, silver or lead. It was the ultimate ultimatum. You either accepted his bribe, the silver, or you took a bullet, the lead. This core philosophy was brutally effective, and it successfully corrupted entire tiers of Colombian law enforcement, the judiciary, and the political system itself. And this duality really defined his entire public image. On the one hand, you had the Niña Plata, his Robin Hood persona. To protect himself from the state, Escobar built a fierce, incredibly loyal base among Medellin's poorest citizens. He literally built houses for slum dwellers in a neighborhood that actually became known as Barrio Pablo Escobar. He constructed soccer fields, schools, and hospitals. This massive wave of popularity even propelled him into politics. He got elected as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives back in 1982. But contrast that with the plomo. His political dreams were completely shattered when the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, publicly exposed his criminal background, forcing Escobar right out of Congress. The ultimate consequence? Escobar ordered Lara Bonilla's assassination. And this single brutal act changed absolutely everything. Section 4. War on the State, the Reign of Terror. Because crossing the line by assassinating a high-ranking government minister brought the very real, very terrifying threat of extradition to the United States. And you really have to understand why extradition was his ultimate nightmare. As this quote famously states, "Better a grave in Colombia than a cell in the United States." This was the motto of Los 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻, which was Escobar's group of threatened narcos. You see, a U.S. prison cell was the one place where his money and his influence meant absolutely nothing. He couldn't just bribe his way out of an American supermax. And to stop that from happening, he was willing to literally burn his country to the ground. Escobar turned Medellin into the murder capital of the world through unprecedented narco-terrorism. In 1985, he backed the M19 guerrillas to lay siege to the Palace of Justice, explicitly to destroy those extradition files. Over 100 people died in that event alone, including 11 Supreme Court justices. Then, in 1989, while attempting to kill presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria, the cartel bombed Avianca Flight 203. 107 innocent people died, and Gaviria wasn't even on the plane. Later that same year, a massive truck bomb outside the DOS intelligence headquarters killed over 50 people and injured hundreds more. The violence was indiscriminate, it was escalating, and it was absolutely terrifying for the public. Section 5. The Final Escape. 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻 and the Search Block. So by 1991, the Colombian government was just completely exhausted by this unending war. They ended up striking an unprecedented deal. Escobar would surrender and serve a reduced sentence, but only if extradition was explicitly banned in the new constitution. But, the absurdity of Pablo Escobar certainly didn't stop at surrender. He built his own prison. It was known as 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻. And this was not a real prison by any stretch. It was a custom-built luxury resort. We're talking a water slide, a nightclub, a soccer field, a jacuzzi, and from inside these incredibly comfortable walls, he just continued running his empire and even went so far as to execute his rivals right inside the facility. So when the government finally had enough and attempted to transfer him to a real federal prison in 1992, Escobar simply walked out the back door and went right back on the run. But escaping 𝓝𝓸𝓲𝓻 really marked the beginning of the end. Escobar spent his final year running like a hunted animal, and the noose was rapidly tightening. He was being pursued on two completely ruthless fronts. First, by the Search Block, which was this highly trained US-backed elite unit of the Colombian National Police. But second, and perhaps even more terrifying for his associates, he was actively hunted by Los Pipis. This was a wildly violent vigilante group made up of rival traffickers, like the Cali cartel, and his own vengeful former allies. So now both the legal authorities and the criminal underworld wanted him gone. Section 6. The Rooftop in Medellin. December 2nd, 1993. The date is December 2nd, 1993. It's just one single day after Escobar's 44th birthday, and his years of evasion are finally about to end. Step 1. Isolated and desperate, he makes a fatal mistake by staying on a phone call with his son, Juan Pablo, for just a little too long. Step 2. The Search Block, utilizing advanced electronic equipment, manages to triangulate his exact radio signal, instantly pinpointing his safe house in a middle-class Medellin neighborhood. Step 3. The police storm the building. Escobar and his bodyguards scramble out a back window, and a massive gunfight just erupts across the terracotta rooftops. And finally, Step 4. In the hail of gunfire, Escobar is hit 3 times. In the leg, the torso, and finally a fatal shot directly through the ear. That long, chaotic escalation arc meets its incredibly abrupt end. But of course, even in death, the story of Pablo Escobar refuses to be simple or clean. It leaves us with this massive, lingering mystery. Who actually fired that fatal final shot? This whole debate perfectly highlights how deeply contested historical records can actually be. The official narrative from the Search Block claims full credit for the raid and the fatal shot that finally ended the world's largest manhunt. However, the Escobar family firmly maintains a completely different story. They believe that Pablo, looking at the approaching officers and realizing that escape was completely impossible, turned his own weapon on himself, fulfilling his ultimate promise to never be taken alive and extradited. But regardless of whose finger was actually on the trigger that day, the aftermath of his life is what truly matters here. We're going to conclude our explainer today with this devastating number, 4,000 to 5,000. That is the estimated human death toll of Escobar's greed and brutality. Yet he leaves behind a deeply, deeply fractured legacy. To some who still live in the houses he built, he is a perceived saint. But to the rest of the world, he's the ultimate symbol of narco-tyranny. So I'll leave you with this to think about. How does a man who inflicted so much terror and literally tore a nation apart still managed to be remembered by some as a savior. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.